everybody who is connected to this mini symposium of the consortium Enoviti International. I thank you warmly for your interest for this symposium, and I wanted just to remember that Enoviti International is an international consortium of academics and industry and private companies which are joining together to exchange informations, scientific achievements, and also opinions about viticulture and enology. It is a consortium that started 10 years ago, and since 1 year and a half, we started a new initiative, which are mini symposia and also spring meetings to have a better communication among the participants of these symposia, to improve the occasions to exchange data and to exchange news, techniques, and so on. So this is working, and 200 people are connected for this mini symposium. Let's go inside the subject. The title is Sustainable Viticulture. Oh, I take you the greetings also of the coordinator of Enoviti International, who is Pierre-Louis Teissedre of the University of Bordeaux. He is finishing his classes, and so he will join us later, but as a component of the executive committee together with Antonio Grassa and Mark Kirstich, we welcome you to this symposium. The sustainable viticulture practices are needed because, as you know, we are somebody defined our geological era with a new name, Anthropocene. Why this? Because human beings on this planet started to be so powerful that they are influencing the environment in which we are living. And so this, as you all know, this may lead to bad consequences of this influence. So we have, starting from the sector where we work, we want to reduce, and we need to reduce the environmental impact of the viticulture activities. I think that everybody knows that in the frame of European Green Deal, the European Union started the farm to fork strategy, and farm to fork strategy is intended within 2030 to reduce the spraying of pesticides by 50% within 2030. The fertilizer use to reduce by 20% within 2030. And also the 25% of agricultural land should be cultivated with organic methods. So all these aims were started by Europe, and we have in Europe we are obliged to follow this. But Europe also wants to improve international cooperation to achieve this, because we are not isolated in the world, but the world trade is very influent for this. So also these strategies are needed, and we have to follow them with in a convinced way and effectively. So coming to viticulture, now we have some presentations, and I want to tell to all the participants that every presentation will be about 15 to 20 minutes, and after every presentation the participants can participate then and make questions, not with the microphone, but using the question and answer section that you can find on the bottom of your screen, also with the chat if you prefer, but question and answers is the section. So after each presentation you can make questions, and then the presenters will answer. Let's, Mark Kirstich, who is co-coordinator of this mini symposium, also will say a few words from his side to introduce our mini symposium.
Thank you, Enrico. I don't want to hold this up any further. I think we want to get on to the talks, but just to welcome everyone from wherever you are all around the world. Robin and I are here from Australia. It's nearly 10 p.m. at night, and I think it's good morning in Europe. So I think let's move on. But just to say that this topic around sustainability is so critical to all of us around the world. Our customers and markets are demanding that our practices in the vineyard and in the winery are more sustainable and more, and safer for our customers in terms of the consumption of what they do. I think also in relation to, our carbon footprint and what we do around, our production systems, they're going to be coming under the microscope a lot more, and we need to be much more accountable for what we do to our markets and our customers about those particular practices. So I think it's important we probably, just focus on that. I think there's 4 very, very good presentations lined up here for you to really look at. And look, without any further to do, I think I'll just try and introduce Robin Dixon. So Robin is our Senior Viticulturalist at the Australian Wine Research Institute in Adelaide. She works in the Industry Development and Support team there. And she's been with us for now around about 2 years at the Institute. And she comes with a lot of experience as a viticulturalist with Treasury Wine Estates and delegates and other appointments as well. But Robin's going to talk to us today about, I think, the important topic in relation to non-chemical weed control in the vineyard. So without any further to do, I'll hand over to Robin to kick off our mini symposium. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Robin, if you want, you can start your presentation. You have the stage now. Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you for the introduction and for the invitation to speak to you today. I join you from the McLaren Vale wine region in South Australia. It's been a very hot, humid day today, 35 with rain. And yeah, it's lovely to join you all. I hope you're all doing well wherever you are in the world. So today I've been asked to talk about a project that we have been working on for the last year regarding non-chemical weed control. Before I start, I just wanted to give you a bit of a background about the Australian Wine Research Institute, and then I'll jump into the non-chemical weed control project, talk about the method that we took, some of the results, and I'll try and pull in some case studies as well to demonstrate how growers are using this information in the vineyard already. Before I get started, I will be referencing the climate map that is on the right-hand side of the screen, or my screen, just to give you a bit of an idea about the diversity of climates that we experience in our wine regions across Australia. On the left-hand side, it's a map of Australia with all of the 65 wine regions located on the map. You can see that they're mostly around the south coast, with some extending up onto the east and west coast and into Tasmania. So we've got very diverse climates between these regions. So who are we? This is us, this is our team. We are based at Waite in South Australia. We're a great group of people from all over the world. So the Australian Wine Research Institute is the Australian grape and wine industry's own research organisation. So we receive funding and direction from industry. We have a research arm, a commercial services arm, and an industry development and support arm. So this is, as Mark said, I am part of the industry development and support team. We're very much industry-led. We rely on industry to give us an idea about where we should focus our attention. And once we have a focus area, we collect current practice data, as well as regulatory data that is related to this focus area, and of course look at the current research that's being done in this space. We then take this information to industry to drive practice change. So we have a really successful program that engages with industry through seminars, workshops, demonstrations. We have a webinar program, and we produce a lot of resources as well that are available on our website. And we have a wonderful support service, which is a help desk. So anyone in the industry can call us to talk about any issues that they have. And we've been receiving a lot of queries about non-chemical weed control lately. So why focus on this area? As I said, we've been receiving a lot of interest from industry. When we produce our agrochemical guidelines for industry, we collect regulatory and market access information. So we're very keen to keep on the front foot there. We've got a growing organic sector. We have a really successful sustainable wine growing program as well, over 900 members. So this very much supports the principles of Sustainable Wine Growing Australia. And we have some really excellent research that's been done in Australia on this topic, particularly at Adelaide Uni. So this fellow here in the middle of the screen is Chris Penfold. He has been working on organic viticulture practices, particularly cover crops in vineyards, for about 20 years. And when he retired, we snatched him up. So he's been working with me on this project, which has been wonderful. So how did we go about this project? Well, we started off with a literature review and really engaged with the researchers. And as I said, we snatched up one of the key researchers in this area. And then we went to the growers who are successfully controlling weeds non-chemically. And we really we interviewed them to find out what their main problem weeds are, what their current practices are, and what their historical practices are, some of the successes and challenges that they've had, their future direction. And we asked them about what is driving change away from chemicals. And this is what we found. There were a number of reasons people were getting rid of the chemicals in their vineyards. One of them was conversion to organics. So we're at about $14 million exports in organic wine, which has bumped up from 2 million back in 2013. So there's a huge amount of growth in this space. There's also a real focus on building soil health. So it's all about resilience to climate change. We are very reliant here on our main river systems. So anything that we can do to build health so that we can increase our water holding capacity is really key. A lot of growers are wanting to reduce their inputs, both for an economic and a sustainable reasons. And it's also, they can consider it best practice in terms of managing herbicide resistance. So not relying on one tool, but using a multiple tools to control weeds. What we also found was that even though growers are super keen to ditch the chemicals, they have a number of questions and concerns. So they are really concerned about what tool to use on their particular soil type, whether it will affect yield or quality or their water demand, whether it will affect frost risk or their pest and disease management. So some really important questions that we set about trying to answer. So the best practice non-chemical weed control principles that we identified through this process is firstly to use a multi-pronged approach. So the best results are often found with growers who use a combination of different tools and techniques to control their weeds, making sure that they're using that their tools and techniques are suited to their site, so site-specific. Growers who monitor and adjust their weed control success to suit the season. And also growers who understand their weeds and work with the life cycle of the weed to get good control. We've found that growers who work with nature rather than against it are getting some really good results, and also reducing inputs as well. And then there's innovation as well. So an example of this multi-pronged approach is at Gemtree Wines. They're here in McLaren Vale. This small map in the corner here, you can see my cursor. So they're here in McLaren Vale. So it's quite a temperate climate here. So it's really warm, dry summers. So water availability is a critical factor. Although over here we do use reclaimed water in this region, which has really saved the region. So Gemtree Wines, they use when they're converting a vineyard to organics, they go through with a dodge plough first to break up the hard packed soil and prepare the site for mechanical weeding. They then go through with a finger weeder, which is super quick. And it can control the weeds when they're small at the start of the season. They then run through with a slower pass with a knife weeder, which is able to control any weeds that the finger weeder has missed. And it also flattens out the mound that the finger weeder creates. And then once they've gotten on top of their weeds over time, they then sow a suitable cover crop under vine to really suppress weed growth. And that really reduces their inputs. So these are the tools that they use. This is an example here of Gemtree vineyards. So this outside row here, you can see has a fence. So they have been unable to do their mechanical weeding practices. So this Kikuyu, it's an invasive grass, has really taken hold. You can see a young vine here really struggling. Whereas in the background there, you can see the rows that have had this treatment that I talked about, the different mechanical weeders, and they've got a cereal planted under vine, and it's really suppressing that invasive grass really well. So to demonstrate the site-specific approach, hand-picked wines. They have vineyards here in the Mornington and Yarra Valley. They also have vineyards up in the Barossa, which is around there, and in Tasmania as well. So quite a diverse range of climates. So Tasmania is quite a bit cooler. They get more rainfall. The Barossa is very dry and hot. The Yarra and Mornington, they have wetter summers compared to the Barossa. So they use an over-row mechanical weeder in their terraced vineyards in the Yarra, and they use a double row finger weeder on flat sites. But in the Barossa, they really have focused on using straw mulch to control weeds. They use about 11 tonne to the hectare of straw mulch under vine to control their weeds. They use a combination of winter grazing and mowing at a high vigour sites and cover crops as well, but only at sites where they have adequate water. And then if they have low vigour sites, they use compost. So we've got an example of an over-row weeder on the left, and then there's the finger weeder, and then there's the straw mulch. So that's what 11 tonne to the hectare of straw mulch looks like in Australia under vine. Sheep grazing and these beautiful cover crops. So Vas Felix, they are over here in Western Australia, Margaret River. They really do a good job of monitoring their weeds in their vineyard and adjusting their process to suit the weeds that they find and also the season. So they traditionally use permanent swards in their mid-row because they're low maintenance. They use a multi-species mix of clover, rye grass, oats, medics. And at their low vigour sites, they roll those mid-rows in wet years and then leave it to hay off or senesce in dry years. Whereas at high vigour sites, they use winter grazing and mowing in wet years, and again, leave it to hay off in the dry years. So they use direct drilling to minimise soil disturbance and reduce carbon losses. And by rolling these mid-row crops, they create this thick thatch that really protects the soil from the warm climate that they have there and water evaporation. So this is an example of their permanent sward. And this, so on the left-hand side is pre-rolling. And then on the right-hand side, you can see what it looks like after rolling. So it really protects the soil surface. So Vas Felix also are very good at adjusting their techniques to suit the weed spectrum. So they spend a lot of time in the vineyard monitoring the weeds that they have, and they look at the impact that those weeds have on their vineyard. So is it reducing vigor? Is it reducing yield? Is it harboring pests or diseases? And they really understand where that weed is in their vineyard. Is it isolated to a hotspot or is it widespread? And then they target their weed control practices to that particular spot. So mechanical weeding can use a lot of fuel and be time consuming. So if they only use those tools where they're really needed, they can reduce the costs and the inputs that they use. They're really good at making sure their weed control timing is spot on to get effective control, and they follow up their control to make sure that the weed just doesn't grow back again. So as an example, this is Kikuyu. This is the weed that I spoke to you about earlier at Gemtree. It's an invasive grass. It's very highly competitive with vines. And Vas Felix, they to control this weed, they use a disc plow to break up the soil and the Kikuyu, and then they use a power harrow to pull that weed out into the mid-row, and then they establish a cover crop to outcompete that Kikuyu, so they're not having to go back and constantly control it over and over again. So they make sure that they cultivate just before a really hot day, because the temperatures help to kill the Kikuyu. Sorry, I've said cooch there. Cooch is another invasive grass. In cool conditions, they use an organic herbicide to mimic that heat event to really kill that grass. Sorry, I'm having a bit of trouble. At Gemtree Wines, they are in the Eden Valley area near the Barossa. So again, very dry winters. They rely heavily on surface runoff for their irrigation. So conserving water is a key factor for them. So they understand that not all weeds are the same. So they have identified weeds within their vineyard that they can tolerate because they provide a benefit to the vineyard without causing too many issues. So rye grass increases carbon and it protects the soil from erosion. Flatweed, which is this weed here, it has a really deep taproot, so it improves soil structure. This cape weed with the yellow flower here is a host for beneficial insects, so they don't mind that plant being there. And clovers and medics, they fix nitrogen, which is essential for an organic vineyard. But the weeds that they don't tolerate are cooch and Kikuyu, which are both those invasive grasses, and also plantain. So we have Kikuyu here, and then plantain. Plantain is a highly competitive weed that sucks the water and nutrients from the vineyard to compete with the vines. So an example of some growers who are really working with nature and not against it are Basham vineyards in the Riverland. So the Riverland is a really hot, dry climate. They have about 260 mil of rain throughout the year, so not much rain. They rely heavily on irrigation from the Murray River. And so again, water conservation is key here. This is what a vineyard in the Riverland used to look like about 30 years ago, completely cultivated. If you drove past a vineyard in windy conditions, you would have half of the topsoil on your car as you drove past, so a lot of erosion. And this is what it looks like now. So Bruce Basham, the owner and vineyard manager, really encourages the native plants in the mid-row, and it's really reduced his need to cultivate the mid-row, and he really hasn't found any impact on water use or yield or quality. So bearing in mind that he has under vine drip irrigation. So the irrigation is put directly on the vine. So this mid-row area here really isn't having an impact on the vines. So Vas Felix, they're big. One of my favorite quotes from Bart is that it's less about what the vineyard looks like and more about how it's functioning. So historically, it was all about having a beautifully manicured vineyard. Now it's about having a functional vineyard. So they have found that moving away from herbicides and maintaining plant cover, as you can see here, across the whole vineyard has increased their soil organic carbon levels by 150%. And they haven't found any negative impact on yield or quality. So it's a way of building the system up rather than pulling it down. So you can see here, this is a really good example of innovation as well. So they've got the under-vine cover crop here. They have mown this sward here and thrown the clippings under vine to spread the seed to establish the crop under vine. So they haven't had to purchase any seeding equipment. And over on this side, you can see an example of how they use sweepers to pull the weeds out from underneath the vines and flatten them down. So for more information on this topic, I encourage you to look at the Australian Wine Research Institute website. We have a weed management page. You can also contact the help desk. And I also encourage you to look out for Professor Tim Cavanaro's work at the University of Adelaide. He's shown how cover crops that are well chosen don't necessarily have an impact on yield or quality, but they have the ability to really build soil carbon very quickly. And so I encourage you to look at his research.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Robin, for your very interesting presentation. And I would have several questions about your presentation, but the time allowed for your presentation is almost over. So if the audience has just one question for you, and then I remember that at the end of this mini symposium, we will have 15 minutes again for a general discussion, so they can also send a message, a question for you. So is there any question for Robin? Let me see if in question and answer. Okay, in the meanwhile, I would like to have your opinion about this. There is a tendency also here in Italy now in the viticultural area where I am, which is Friuli, northeastern Italy, to avoid too much tillage in the frame of no herbicide control. So I'm interested in your rolling treatment, because sometimes green manure, which is also a good technique, but sometimes is too invasive. So just not tilling, but just mowing or rolling is better. What is your opinion about this?
Definitely rolling in our situation is a lot better than mowing or cultivating. So mowing chops up the crop, and so it breaks down a lot quicker over time, and it doesn't provide the same amount of protection from the sun. Whereas when you roll the crop, It stops the crop from growing, but it produces that beautiful thatch, which is like a mulch on top of the soil surface. And when I was talking about the sweeping under vine that Vas Felix use, it really does the same thing. It just sort of pushes the crop down, so it stops growing and isn't growing into the vine, but it produces that beautiful thatch to protect the soil.
Okay, very, very shortly, because we are a little bit late. There are questions for you. One from Carlos Lopez from University of Lisbon. What about water competition with the vine?
With cover crops, I
Yes,
presume.
yes.
Yes.
Okay, go ahead. But also Antonio Grassa was expressed the desire to answer to this question on live. But yeah, give your opinion about this.
Sure. So some cover crops can be very competitive with vines, taking a lot of soil moisture, but there are results that show that certain types of crops, when planted in the right conditions and managed well, do not extract too much of, or don't compete with vines to cause losses of yield. So you have to be very careful in a really hot, dry climate. But there definitely are species that we have found you can use successfully when managed well. So in terms of management, a lot of our growers go through and they will roll the crop in spring, so it has the benefit of reducing the frost risk in some areas, but it also stops that crop from competing with the vines. So, but it still creates that thatch, so you're still getting the benefit of that crop without it sucking too much moisture.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Answer?
Yeah. Thank you. Antonio, if you want to answer or to make a comment about.
No, I probably clicked where I shouldn't. I didn't want to do anything.
Okay. So there is another question of Dai Jan Wu. Great talk to Robin. Many internet case studies. Are there any general guideline for assessment a weed is tolerate or not for a vineyard?
Oh, that's a good question. It really depends on the site. So I would encourage you to monitor your vineyard carefully, to have a look at what impact that weed is having on your vineyard. So generally, the really invasive grasses should not be tolerated because they are so competitive and they can spread so quickly. And weeds that have thorns and prickles and outcompete are very competitive with other plants should not be tolerated. But we actually have a fact sheet on our website that I can send you that will give you some guidelines about what practices to follow when you're using volunteer swords.
Yeah, that would be very, if you can add it on a chat, some indication about this. A final question is, are you using a roller or a roller crimper?
Oh. Hi, Mark. Nice to hear from you. We are generally using a crimp roller. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it works much better than just a standard roller.
Okay, thank you very much. And Robin, let's move to the next presentation. Paolo Civilotti will make the next presentation. Sustainable canopy management, early leaf removal affects wine tiles and grape tile precursors in white grape varieties. He is working at the University of Udine, as I am, where we are speaking now from here. So Paolo, please go ahead with your presentation.
Okay, good morning, everybody. I would like first to thank Enrico and Mark for the organization of this nice symposium. It's always an opportunity to present data, and actually we publish most of the data we will present today, but some of them actually are still needed to be presented online. In this slide, actually, it's listed a lot of people that during the years was working with me to help for the collection of data in many experiments. And actually, there are also a lot of several EU, Interreg and national projects that contributed for these researches. So I will talk about the sustainable canopy management, and in particular the use of early leaf removal in wide grape varieties. So in the last maybe 18 years, we made really a lot of efforts in order to understand the physiological implication of leaf removal on yield and grape quality. Actually, the part of Italy from which I come from is characterized by a really high amount of rains, even more than 1800 millimeters per year. And so one of the most important issues here is the management of grape rots. So we started 15 years ago to investigate the possibility to use leaf removal in order to improve the cluster microclimate and so to reduce the occurrence of rot. We understood that with this technique, we could also manage yields and relate to that also grape quality. But we are aware that nowadays the temperatures are rising due to climate change, and so we have to take care and apply this practice, because leaf removal could cause a reduction of secondary metabolites and sunburns on grapes. So leaf removal is a good way to improve the cluster microclimate in the fruiting zone. And we know that the reduction of the humidity limits the development of rots. Normally, leaf removal can be applied between berry set and pea-size phenological stages, but can also be applied pre-flowering with the aim to reduce the cluster compactness. This approach actually was studied extensively by me, by other colleagues from Italy and all around the world. And there are a lot of results presenting, but basically on red grape varieties, not much on whites. Here we can see the shoot development at berry set and pre-flowering time. I painted the leaf in different colors to highlight the photosynthetical efficiency of the leaves at these two phenological stages. So if we remove 2-3 leaves from the base of the shoot at berry set, there will be actually not a significant change in shoot photosynthesis. And so we will not have a change in the cluster compactness in the berry set. As opposite, if we remove 6 leaves at pre-flowering stage, what you can see here is that we leave only the young leaves at the top of the shoots, which are not photosynthetically active. And actually, the shoot tips will compete for carbohydrates with the plant. And so this will reduce the cluster compactness because the berry set will be reduced. So in the first experiment that I carried out on Pinot Noir in Slovenia, we worked with a vineyard that was oriented east-west, and we positioned some temperatures and humidity sensors within the canopy. In this figure, you can see I calculated the difference between the temperature within the fruit zone and the atmospheric temperature. In white, we can see the trend of temperatures from the end of May to the end of September in the control treatments where leaves were not removed, while yellow and pink color represent the temperature difference in the veraison and pre-flowering treatment, respectively. When leaf removal is applied early in the season, what happens that immediately the temperature inside the canopy increases, but after a week, the values return back to the same values of the other treatments. Why like that? This is due to the development of the lateral leaves that can cover back the clusters, and so the temperature actually are similar to other treatments. On the other hand, if we remove the leaves at veraison, actually the temperature increase and remain high because the laterals cannot grow because we are too late in the season. We can see the same result on the relative humidity. So here we represent again the difference between the relative humidity in the canopy and the external. So what we can see, if we remove the leaves at pre-flowering, the relative humidity of the fruiting zone lowers down and remains lower than the control all along the season. Why like that? Because even if the laterals are growing, actually the leaf style is small, and so the humidity can be removed easily by the wind passing through the canopy. If we remove the leaves later at veraison time, actually the humidity in the cluster area will be lower than the other treatments because actually there will be no lateral development. So in this picture, actually, we can see what? The effect of the treatments, leaf removal treatments, applied in different phenophases on the cluster compactness. On the left side, you will feel that the pre-flowering leaf removal treatment reduced the cluster compactness, and so also the possibility to reduce also the possibility to have infection by bunch rots. One of the problems actually that are related with the sunlight exposure of cluster is sunburns. One can argue that leaf removal increased the problematic, but surprisingly, we found that early intervention of leaf removal proved instead to reduce sunburns, at least in our environments. This is a picture of Traminer in which you can see a lot of such problems. So the UV radiation actually increase the biosynthesis of flavonoids that are metabolized that protect the berries, avoiding the sunburns. We proved with the thesis of Melita Sternat-Lemut that the flavonoids at early stage, pre-flowering or berry set leaf removal promoted higher concentration of such compounds and so protected the berries from sunburns. So in the seasons 2013 and 2014, actually, we set up a couple of experiments, and the main experiment was set up in Collio, in northeastern Italy, on Sauvignon Blanc, in which we compare three treatments: a control where leaves were not removed, and two treatments where we removed 3 and 6 leaves per shoot at pre-flowering and post-flowering time, respectively. In both seasons, we assessed yield and leaf area parameter, basic maturation parameter, total polyphenols, and at harvest time, also thiol precursors and methoxypyrazines. Moreover, we evaluated gene expression related with thiol precursor biosynthesis, and at the end, we made wines and we analyzed thiols in wines. Most of the results you can find in this paper that appeared in Journal of Agriculture and Food Chemistry in 2017. Here we will present just some of the results. So talking about the thiols, it is well known that there are three main compounds responsible for the aroma of Sauvignon Blanc. So 3-SH, 3-SHA, and 4-MSP. So this compound accounts for olfactive notes ranging from grapefruit to passion fruit to melon, but also elderberry flowers and box tree, depending on their concentration, their own and their combined concentration. In grapes, we do not find these compounds as they are, but the majority of 3-SH and 4-MSP actually derives from cysteinilated and glutationylated conjugates, while the acetate is formed during fermentation, but by the acetylation of 3-SH. So it's an action of the yeasts. These aroma compounds actually are biosynthesized at the really end of maturation period. And from what is known, the occurrence and the concentration peak of 4-MSP precedes 3-SH. So now we go in detail to the data of the experiment, and looking at the meteorological condition of these two seasons investigated in 2013, after a rainy period, actually in spring, the summer season was really hot, with several days of temperatures above 30 degrees and with limited rains. The water stress conditions actually occurred in this season and are known to promote the biosynthesis of thiol precursors. The rainy conditions of 2014 and the occurrence of floods at harvest actually were a little bit problematic for the quality of Sauvignon Blanc. And so in this case, I will not talk about the data collected in this season. And even if you have a look at the maturation trends, we can see that actually the maturation was not completed. And so also the biosynthesis of thiol precursors was lower. If we go on with the results of the thiol precursors, we found significant differences of the concentration of glutationylated precursors among treatments. The treatments applied pre-flowering showed tendentially higher concentration of G4-MSP and an intermediate concentration of G3-SH. Different post-flowering leaf removal reported the lowest concentration of 4-MSP precursors, but the highest of 3-SH glutathione precursor. So we did the wines, as I told you before, and actually we did it for Sauvignon Blanc, but also for another variety, Sauvignon As, which is grown here, actually, and we analyzed thiols. So what we found, actually the thiol concentration correlate well with the data that we found for thiol precursors. Here we can see that the trend was similar to both varieties, Sauvignon and Sauvignon Blanc. And so we can see that pre-flowering favors the 4-MAP, while post-flowering leaf removal actually favors 3-SH. In combination with a colleague from Croatia, we did a similar experiment in Eastern Malvasia. But here we put in comparison an untreated control in which leaves were retained with post-flowering leaf removals applied both manual and mechanically. And again, we evaluated yield and grape technological parameters, but what is more important, we evaluated the wine aroma compounds, and they did also the sensory analysis of wines. So if we have a look at the yield parameters, actually, as we could expect, there were not many significant differences in yield parameters because the treatment was applied post-flowering, and so we did not expect any reduction of the berry set. What we found was actually a significant reduction, even if not so important, in the berry weight. But looking at the aromatic compounds, we can see here the effect of manual and mechanical leaf removal on the thiols in wines, that is quite similar to what we found in experiments carried out on Sauvignon and Sauvignon Ash. So a reduction on 4-MAP and an increase of 3-MH. And in the meanwhile, what we found was that also the other aromatic compounds were affected. Here I reported just a few of these aromatic compounds that were evaluated, and you can see that both mechanical and hand leaf removal treatments increase the amount of these compounds, and mostly in case of hand leaf removal. We have to remember that Croatia, Istrian Croatia, is a little bit southern than Friuli Venezia Giulia, and so we were a little bit scared in applying leaf removal in such area, which has actually a higher temperature during the summer. But instead was a positive result was obtained. And also, the sensory analysis proved that the wines produced with the leaf removals, both actually the wines were improved from the results of the sensory evaluation, both in the olfactive parameters, but also in the wine overall quality and structure. So if we put together all the results of these three trials, actually, we can conclude that the results presented here in both the environments that were under study prove that leaf removal is a sustainable practice to apply in order to improve the quality of white grapes and wines. If we compare the application timings, we could speculate that maybe post-flowering leaf removal promote an advancement of grape maturation, favoring a higher concentration of 3-SH instead of 4-MSP. As opposite, pre-flowering leaf removal probably delayed a little bit the maturation, and so maintaining a higher concentration of 4-MSP instead of 3-SH that was lower as compared with very set leaf removal treatments. So there is still, some investigations that need to be carried out in order to ascertain if this speculation is correct. But the data that we collected in the experiment that we carried out actually are consistent, and so we think that our suggestion could be a valid interpretation of the phenomenon. And with this, I thank you everybody for your attention, and thank you again for the organization of the symposium.
Thank you, Paolo, for the presentation. Now, let's see if... vediamo. If there are some questions. Okay, there is Efstratios Guillaume Sirafis is asking pelargonic, but it's just one word. I don't understand exactly if there is.
That's from the previous presentation.
Okay, sorry.
The first one is from Mark Craven.
Oh, Mark Craven. Leaf removal certainly has advantages, but what is the long-term effect on carbohydrate reserves? With Sauvignon in New Zealand, we found a clear reduction in CHO, carbohydrates, over time when removing leaves after harvest. And after 2, but certainly after 3 years, the reduction in yield even became evident. Paolo.
So, this is a challenging question, Mark. We are carrying out now one experiment on Pinot Noir in which we extended the experiment in the same treatments for 3 years. And actually, after 3 years, we saw that there was a similar effect on the yield, actually, but for now, we did not measure the carbohydrates in the plant during the different seasons. From what I searched in the literature, I just found one paper from French researchers that carried out the same experiment for 4 years. And they saw that it was a cumulative effect on the reduction of the yield with pre-flowering leaf removal. This I'm sure. And what I think is that if we will use in a vineyard the pre-flowering leaf removal, maybe we have to alternate some years, since we will obtain naturally the reduction of the berry set after 2 or 3 years of pre-flowering leaf removal.
Yeah,
you wrote a paper. I think, Mark, that I read this paper. Now I do not have in mind. I'm sure I read, and maybe I also cited it in my papers.
Okay. Hello, Pierre-Louis, who joined the meeting a little bit late. Yeah, hello. Welcome.
So sorry to be late, and great that you manage everything. Thank you to all of you.
Okay, okay. Yeah, a last question for Paolo Sivilotti. From Sergio Pinto. What is the effect of vine orientation on leaf removal?
Yeah, so the vine orientation is really important, because if we are in a really hot environment, I mean, the east-west orientation maybe are a little bit challenging, because on the south exposition, the temperature can increase really a lot. So depending on the environment and the summer temperatures, I mean, leaf removal should be applied, I mean, in the correct, I mean, side of the canopy, in order to avoid excessive temperature and so loss of secondary metabolites, mainly aromatics. Is this what you wanted from me?
Yeah, Stratios is saying, thank you for Santorini Island in Greece, it is not recommended.
Could be, because actually one of the important characteristics of the vineyard is that if we apply pre-flowering or berry set leaf removal, we need some recovery of the leaf area, because we have to promote the flavonols to be biosynthesized, but on the other end, we have to have the leaves back to the cluster in order to reduce the maximum temperature during the central part of the days.
Okay. Sergio Pinto says, thank you, Paolo. So we have to move. Thank you, Paolo. I also say thank you warmly to you for your presentation and also the answer to the questions. Okay, so let's go to the next speaker, Antonio Grassa, and who will present, who is from Sogrape in Portugal, researching sustainable alternatives for integrated plant production at Sogrape. Please, Antonio, to you the stage.
Thank you, Enrico. I'm sharing my screen. Please just confirm you can see it.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and my congratulations to my preceding speakers. Very interesting presentations. So I'm going to present here some of the work being done by Sogrape in terms of researching sustainable alternatives for plant protection in an integrated way with the whole management of the crop. And being sustainability an important strategic pillar of the business being developed by Sogrape, I propose you to watch a short 6-minute video depicting pretty much the work that we have been doing in terms of sustainability in the company, in all the areas, in all the geographic origins we are working, from Europe to South America and in New Zealand. So please bear with me and just
okay, fine.
the video.
Since our origins, we have always depended on the land, on the sun, on the water, on the generosity of the vineyard. We've been developing our business responsibly for over 75 years, contributing to respecting the places we do business in and finding ways to make them better. This is a long-term mission involving everyone in our extended family around the world and throughout our value chain. From saving water to reducing our CO2 emissions, from recycling to reusing, from research to innovation. There are many initiatives that we have developed with the future in mind, and we don't want to stop here. We want the future to have usable water. We want the planet to be a better place to live in the future. We want a future where nothing is lost and everything is transformed. We want to create knowledge for the future using today's technologies. We want to continue to have our employees at the center of our success. Through health and well-being initiatives, training programs, and many other benefits that provide a work-life blend that inspires and brings joy to our people. We want to continue to create a positive impact in the community. We will continue to develop projects that support entrepreneurship, art, and culture in the various geographies. And because wine is synonymous with celebration, we want to continue to encourage its responsible consumption. Our commitment to sustainability is a legacy we carry from our past and wish to perpetuate for generations to come. A continuous work recognized around the world, and one that is based on collaboration with various partners. Actively contributing to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, our global sustainability approach will reshape the way we operate to build a more sustainable and inclusive future. Leading the way to So Grape's 100th anniversary in 2042, we want to pave the way to a healthier planet. Safeguard our legacy on its journey into the future. inspire happier and more responsible lives. Sustainability is and will continue to be part of our history. We know where we come from, where we are, and above all, where we want to go. We want to bring friendship and happiness to everyone we touch through our wonderful wines.
So if I have shown this to you, it's because what follows, I didn't want to be perceived as a one-off type of endeavor, of projects, but as something integrated in a larger strategy that is at the core of what we do and what we are. So this slide gives you an idea of what has been the progress in Europe in terms of having a more efficient use of plant protection. This is not viticulture, this is overall agriculture. And you can see that there has been very different situations across different geographies. Countries that have reduced up to 71% of their usage of plant protection products in agriculture, up to others that have increased more than the double of that quantity. And that you still have quite a wide spectrum across all countries in terms of how much you use of plant protection products per hectare of usable surface. And these are, as you can see, data that is publicly available from the Eurostat, the European Organization for Statistics. Other studies have shown, for example, that in terms of the use of copper and the dependence on specific chemical substances, there are also differences across the continent and situations that need to be addressed specifically. And this dependence becomes serious when you understand that as an evolution of the drive towards a more sustainable continent and a more sustainable activity in agriculture, you have a number of substances that are being used in agriculture that are going to be revised in terms of their license to use. So because we have, as you probably remarked in the video, a strong commitment to sustainable agriculture, but sustainable in an integrated way, meaning that we are not just looking at the way we use plant protection products, but also at questions like water use, erosion, soil health, also worker safety and consumer safety, all of that in an integrated way. We joined into two research projects, among others, that pretty much have that integrated stance at the core of what the projects do. So one of those projects is this project Copper Replace, which is done on a joint venture between Portugal, France, and Spain. As you can see, there are a number of organizations, some of them you might know in here. And in this project, over 28 months, we are researching ways of decreasing the usage of copper in protecting grapevines. So we are using studies of alternative products, among them resistant solicitors, but also plant extracts. We are using into ways of assessing the soil vulnerability to copper pollution and remediation techniques. We are looking into the way of having smarter ways of spraying in order to reduce the quantity of copper use, but also making sure that that quantity gets to where it should be and where it really makes a difference. And then integrating the whole three sets into a new integrated management system that is going to be evaluated this year in 2022, according to not just operational indicators, but also economic, environmental, and social impact assessments in order to have a real overall sustainability assessment. At the same time, the project is creating a knowledge network across the 3 countries with farmers and all other types of stakeholders that will be the targets of the dissemination of the project results. So stay tuned and visit the webpage of the project. Just Google Copper Replace, you'll get there, and you can follow what is going on in there. The second project is a larger project with 19 partners from 6 countries, Project Novotera. And here, this is not just focusing copper, but also several other pesticides, and not just in vineyards, but also in olive groves. And in here, we are deploying different research trials. We are looking into new ways of applying protection products. We are looking into new alternative products, mainly at eliciting resistance, but we are also looking at robotics exactly for weeding applications without any chemical application. And at the same time, also to VRT or variable rates technologies and how you can deploy those on areas that are different in the way that you do your management practices. So this goes back to something that Robin was saying at her presentation, which is the multi-pronged approach. So we are taking everything we have at our disposal, getting it all together to achieve a better management goal in terms of how we do it and the outcomes from the way we do it. Specifically looking not just at the productive outcome, but also to the impacts on people and the environment. 2 other projects, in this case done at the national level, also bear some promise on improving the way we achieve our sustainability in the way we manage our viticulture. So on the left side, Project ABC Yeasts is looking at the potential of different yeast strains to act as antagonists for fungal pathogens. And on the right side, Project Previne Grape is looking at different new novel plant extracts being trialed for the first time in Portugal, and assessing how those can actually act as replacements for the substances we are using right now. Overall, and in order to make a long story short, what we are trying to achieve here is what has been proposed by this OIV resolution, for this resolution that guides the implementation of the principles of sustainable vitiviniculture, meaning we need to keep a sustainable market in line with societal expectations. And this needs to be done at all places where the organization deploys its work, inside and outside the organization. But at the same time, it needs to support a competitive performance from companies. Because this is the way you get confidence and social license in order to keep on developing your business into the future. And this means that we have to have a dual objective of not just reducing negative environmental impacts, but at the same time adapting to the challenge of climate change. Therefore, the adaptation of these new production practices require this double-pronged perspective. And that's why we are starting to see, and we anticipated that for a number of years, that's already in the market, the actual proposal of organic produce and organic wines as part of that produce is not enough. Consumers are becoming aware of the need of going to the full balance between the three legs of sustainability, between environment, between people and communities, and between a healthy economic development that supports those communities and their capacity to keep on protecting and conserving the environment. So I'd like to finish and call your attention to this fantastic sentence by Sir David Attenborough at the last COP26 last year in Glasgow, which I believe it's something that if we keep in our minds, will go a long way to actually get our act together. The main thing here is that we need to work together at all levels. We need to work together among ourselves. We need to work together in the value chain between producers and consumers and everybody in between. And we need to work together between companies, policymakers, and researchers in order to make this agenda go forward and prepare a future for all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Antonio. Very interesting presentation. Let's see if the audience has some questions. No, if not, I will ask you about the last thing that you were mentioning about the market and the organic wine. Do you have any idea why there was a slight reduction in bio wine or organic wine demand or sales in 2021, if this is just as I suppose a contingent momentaneous decrease, or there may be some other explanation?
Well, right now, anything that we can say it's purely speculative. We don't know why it happened. We just know it did. It did happen. Yeah. So one thing that we have been seeing, and that is easy to see if you go onto Google Trends and you Google organic and sustainable, is that organic has been, in terms of use in Google searches, has been stabilizing, whereas sustainable and sustainability and any other related words has been increasing. And we see in the marketplace more and more demand from retailers and from distributors of sustainable certifications. That is a drive that we are seeing more and more in a very clear way. I believe, and we actually have some data to show that the retailers and distributors are acting as a transmission chain from what has been the actual consumer demand at some levels. And the fact that the consumer has never really, overall, has never really understood what organic means, really, what is the real functioning of the organic certification, I believe plays a great deal into that. Then in some markets, like in the United States, it never really did catch up very well. For many years that you have seen, if you go to shops in the United States, sections of wines that would be called environmental friendly, green wines, but you really did not see many saying organic wine in there in the United States. And that's because in the United States, the organic certification regulations are quite different from the ones we have in Europe. And in many situations, it made wines not really with the same level of quality. Now, it's important to bear in mind that we as a company, we are not in any way against organic. Actually, we are producing organic grapes and organic wines. What we believe is that it's not sustainable to do it everywhere. There are places where you can do it sustainably and other places where you can't. And to actually know that and understand where you should do it sustainably, it's a responsibility from every producer.
Yeah, actually, I can confirm also, because the wine economists in my university here, they are since years making researches about what the consumers are expecting, and sustainability is more attractive than organic by itself. So that's true for the market. But yeah, okay. Thank you for this clarification. Any other question?
I think Mark wanted to say something, and Pierre-Louis as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Enrico. And Antonio, great presentation. And I like how you really sort of brought it together around the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN. I think that was really good. My question is, where do you think, potentially the novel breeding technologies might fit into helping to address our sustainability issues into the future? And I know that this is a very challenging question, but, with some of the development of these technologies, obviously we've got a lot of programs throughout the world, including Europe, that are looking at, advanced genetics in this area. But how important do you think that is, and what do you think the role of novel breeding technologies, and I've selected those words very carefully, will be involved in this?
Well, I think that is a question that is very much open, and of course I do not have any definite answer towards that. I think we lack a lot of knowledge onto the real possibilities of those technologies. So we know they exist, we know they have been deployed in some situations, in some sectors, but the full consequences of deploying them overall are still not well understood. I'm not just talking in terms of environmental impact, but I'm also talking about the impact for economics and for business models that have been developed upon mostly or basically natural type of production. I think that in terms of novel genomic techniques, we would require to have a lot more research being done in order to understand how and if they can be used, namely in terms of understanding how it can be identified to begin with, and then to understand what would be the impacts of deploying them on the wild, on the natural environment. And only then, I think, could any type of decision or opinion be correctly formed. Right now, to make any type of statement towards the benefits or the potential damages of deploying this type of technology, I would consider it highly speculative and potentially misleading. So my stance in this and my company's stance has always been increase research, give us more knowledge, more answers to how and if this can be used.
I totally agree with this. Pierre-Louis, sorry if I forgot you before.
No trouble. So thank you, Antonio, for the great presentation. Really very nice. Just one point is concerning economical part. Do we know what is the cost of changing the way to do the things finally? What is the cost of this new management of sustainability? Is it a lot of investment? Is it more people working? Is it a cost that it can be okay for all the wineries actually, or do we have an idea about it?
Yes, we are starting to have ideas, and these projects we are involved now, these 4 projects I mentioned, they all have that aspect as one of the answers we want to have. Because as you well mentioned, there are a number of changes that have got to be done. I mean, it's not just replacing one product by another. You have to rethink the whole way you manage your protection. And all of that needs to be considered. At the same time, we are evolving in a quite volatile economic environment right now. For example, if you would have a carbon tax being imposed on fuel in the coming years, that would change dramatically all the economic calculations that you could do right now. One of the things that we are trying to get very much clear, and that's also in the scope of climate change, is what is the cost of not doing anything, of remaining with business as usual, because that gives you a good baseline and a good background to consider adaptation investments. And if you have a perspective of a strong loss due to either the fact that you cannot use anymore some of the substances that you can use now, or that you are going to have an increasing temperature in the environment that is going to decrease your yields, for example, then if you project that into the future, you can evaluate what is the potential loss that your business is bound to have. And therefore, an adaptation investment to avoid that loss might become feasible and even sensible. Okay, so the thing here, when you are talking about sustainability, you cannot think short term. You cannot think on 3-year cycles. You have to think on 10, 15, 30-year cycles, at least the lifetime of a vineyard. That would be the real framework where you should reason in terms of considering your investments. And if you do that, actually a lot of these sustainability adaptations makes total sense from an economic standpoint.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Antonio, a last question, who is from Robin Dixon. She says, hi, Antonio, great presentation. We are very interested in alternatives to copper. Are you able to share any information about the emerging products you are looking at? I remember that in the presentation of Antonio, there was also a list of alternative products, but yeah, please, Antonio.
No, actually not. The list was of products that we use today and that are going to be revised in terms of being able to continue to be used. So those are what we call the contentious substances candidate for replacement. Okay? So that's what we are about to lose. Unfortunately, I cannot share with you right now because of project confidentiality what are the substances we are using now. But I repeat what I said in terms of keeping a close watch on what is being published on both projects' websites. So Copper Replace and Novotera, because we are about to publish in the next months the first papers regarding our first trials. And therefore, in there, you will be able to start seeing some of the substances and the approaches, because it's not just the substance, also the approaches that we are using.
Okay, thank you so much. And now let's move to the last speaker, who is João Luis Barroso of the consortium Vinhos do Alentejo. I don't know if it is a consortium or you will may present.
It's not a consortium. Thank you very much, Enrico.
Yeah.
Well,
you can go on with the presentation.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to thank the invitation from the organization and also congratulate the very inspiring presentations that we've seen so far. I think my presentation will be kind of an interesting corollary of what we've been talking this morning. I'm going to give a little bit of a context of what I do very quickly. I'm the sustainability coordinator for the Wines of Alentejo Sustainability Program. The Wines of Alentejo is the organization that controls and regulates the DOC wines in this region of Portugal. We're the biggest region in the country. We're also a region that faces several big challenges, such as climate change, water scarcity, heat waves, and so this sustainability program has been helping a lot to assist producers into their adaptation efforts with this regards. I'm going to start by giving a bit of context to some aspects of climate change. I'd like to start with this quote, already 80 years old, from the IPCC, from the International Panel for Climate Change Convention, on the capacity of wine systems to deal with dangerous climatic disturbances, responding or reorganizing themselves in order to maintain their essential function while maintaining their capacity for adaptive transformation, which is fairly what Antonio Graça just mentioned with regards to the vision of the industry, with regards to sustainability and all of the initiatives and efforts that we've been talking throughout the morning. So some will know, some may not know, some may be a bit disbelieve, but this is where we are right now in terms of climate change. The RCPs have been defined in the representative concentration pathways defined by the UNFCCC. And the reality is right now we are in between an RCP6 with emissions peaking by 2070 and plus 4.1 degrees by the end of the century, or the RCP 8.5, which is a fairly more grim view of what the future holds, with the peak on the end of the century of around 6.4 degrees. I have to say that I find it quite interesting that this discussion still exists, because if we wonder in our own bodies, our human bodies, when we have 1 degree more of temperature than the normal, we have a fever. And on average, if you have 3 more degrees of temperature, we're dead. So why would it be any different with the planet? And why would we be even considering that we'd be able to live in a planet with 4 extra degrees of normal temperature? So that's something I believe should help us reflect a little bit on what we need to do. So this is what the researchers indicate that can be the areas, the current areas where we produce wine, the traditional areas where we produce wine in the world. Where will we be by the end of the century? And as you can see, most of these areas will be are projected to be no longer suitable for the production of grapes to produce wine. Whereas we're also will be witnessing some new areas to produce wine, particularly in the northern parts of the European continent and in the northern parts of the Northern American continent. Obviously, there will still be some areas that can be suitable, but most of all, we'll be looking at a paradigm shift in terms of geographic distributions of winemaking. So we'll be looking at the 2 RCPs, so the 6 and the 8.5, with 2 degrees increase warming. We can look at something in between 56 to 24% decline in the areas where we can produce grapes. But if we go to the 4 degrees increase, which hopefully we won't, there will be, or there are predicted that there can be up to 85% decline in the regions where we grow grapes, or at the minimum, at least half of the same areas that we have today. So this is something that's been observed pretty much across the world, from the antipodes of Portugal, which is New Zealand and Australia, to Chile, North America, or any wine producing country in the Mediterranean basin. So water shortages, earlier vintages, more and more, hotter and shorter vintages, which then has a rippling effect on the refrigeration, on logistics, on wastewater treatment. So the pressures are cross-sectional and not just with regards to the viticulture in itself. Increased sunburn, which was a phenomena also already mentioned in one of the presentations before. Increased color in whites, increased color in reds, lower acidity, higher phenolic levels, and even smoke taint, which is difficult to quantify, but there's a higher risk of this phenomena, particularly with regards to the increase in wildfires that we witnessed both in Australia or in the United States last year. So I also bring this sentence from the World Economic Forum from 2 years ago that acknowledges again that human activity has already caused a loss of 33% of old wild mammal and alpha plants in the planet. And also the Zurich Insurance Group warned of the urgent need to adapt faster to avoid the worst and irreversible impacts of climate change, and to do more to protect the planet's biodiversity. Biologically diverse ecosystems capture vast amounts of carbon, as we all know, and provide massive economic benefits that are estimated at 33 trillion per year, which is the equivalent to the GDP of the US and China combined. Interestingly enough, we was just released another report from the World Economic Forum that estimates that 65% of China's GDP may be at risk due to precisely nature's loss. So finally, and once and for all, seems to be this acknowledgement and this direct connection between economic prosperity and biodiversity preservation. So very quickly, how are we in Europe? I bring Europe here, but I could have brought any other region in the world. What are the trends that we've been witnessing from the Environmental European Agency? for the last 40 years, really, in terms of annual temperatures. And what we can see indeed is an increase, a growing increase of extreme temperatures on average throughout the entire continent, with a particular emphasis in the region of Turkey, but all throughout even the Russian tundra, but all throughout Europe, we have been seeing indeed this increase in temperatures. And in fact, we all know that the last 20 years of the first 20 years of this new century have witnessed the highest temperatures recorded in human history. They're all been the last 10 most high temperatures have been all recorded in the last 20 years. So obviously this has then a direct negative impact in precipitation. And so obviously we again see there's an increase in the reduction of precipitation, and particularly again in the Mediterranean basin, which is, God behold, where you also have all or pretty much the big and traditional wine producing countries of Europe. They're all indeed located in this same basin. And then obviously directly related, we're talking about droughts, both in terms of frequency and severity. And what we indeed see is that they are increasing. They are increasing in time and in around 43 to 44 degrees.
João, your connection is not stable. João. Okay.
Yeah.
The connection was not
Is it better?
stable, so we couldn't listen the last sentences.
Okay, so I was just saying that with regards to the droughts, we do indeed see the increase in frequency and severity throughout the ages, and in fact, in Alentejo, we also witnessed that very much in the flesh. 3 years ago, we had a very intense heat wave in August of around a week. Temperatures were around 43, 44 degrees, which had very high negative impacts in the harvest. And obviously, then here I bring the two scenarios: the RCP 4.5, which is already a little bit out of the picture, and the RCP 8.5, which is the one that we don't want to go to in terms of projected changes in annual summer and winter temperatures. And as you can see, the map of pretty much all of Europe is dark red, which means very high temperatures, which is indeed what we do not want in terms of keeping the good quality of our grapes and our wines. And again, extreme heat waves, the same scenario for RCP 4.5 and RCP. We have a situation here that we need to start tackling. And how can we do this? What are good examples that we can, at least we in Alentejo, can share with regards to both reduction in the use of resources, reuse in the use of resources, and the use of resources in terms of boosting regeneration that will indeed help to face a higher resilience of the systems in terms of a climate change scenario. So I will be talking a little bit about many examples that have been already addressed in the other presentations. So first, we were talking about precision irrigation. So technology, the use of technology in terms of water management. Water is it's a very valuable resource, not only for agriculture, for life. In fact, worldwide, 70% of all water is used for agriculture, 90% in developing countries. And so indeed, water is something that we really need to control and preserve. So the use of technologies such as weather stations, be that enviroscans, water scans, are all equipments that will allow us to control the water use in any point of the production cycle, in every point of the day, in order to understand what are the exact requirements of water of the plants. You can use NDVI tools. We can use all kind of schemes and robots that can really help us to reduce as much as possible the use of water, to be able to reduce and control as much as possible that same resource. Drip irrigation is another example on how we can just give the amount of water that the plant needs, and indeed also not use water throughout the day, but obviously in times when the evapotranspiration will be the shortest, in order to again maximize the use of the water. Then all of those devices can help understand what are the moisture and the humidity levels in the soil. So again, not being able to just use water if we just had it plenty to waste, really. Another thing that has been very interesting a little bit throughout everywhere in the world is to reuse, as I like to say. So many varieties have been pretty much forgotten. And Portugal is indeed one of the countries with the most higher number of endemic grape varieties. And what we've been witnessing is lots of producers that have been doing a lot of tests with several different of these varieties. We call them ampelographic fields. And in this photo, you can see 4 different varieties, very, very endemic, with very weird Portuguese names. The Portuguese people here will understand better the names and will understand the peculiarity of the names. So the idea is to obviously understand which varieties can be used in a more stressed environment, in a more warm environment, it with less water availability, in order to indeed boost the resilience potential of the systems. Obviously, then this will have another kind of impacts that Antonio Graça also kind of mentioned briefly, which is the education of the consumers, because if we go into different varieties, there will be a need to educate consumers in terms of the profile of these wines, with different aspects from the ones were the classic varieties that we've been used to pretty much flooding the markets with. Another example of reuse, in this case, composting. So the grabbing all the waste, organic waste from, in this case, the cellar, and use it, the leaves, use it to compost. And when this compost is ready, they can be used as fertilizer in the field. Obviously, this compost is not perfect. It releases methane. Methane is also a greenhouse gas. So obviously, we need to improve in order to capture this methane and basically use it to produce energy. But in the meantime, at least, we can, by composting, reduce the dependence of inorganic fertilizers, reduce the dependence of fossil fuels, and obviously also reduce the carbon footprint of the use of these same fossil fuels. Reduce and regenerate cover crops. It's been widely spoken about today, all the benefits of a cover crop, from the soil regeneration, from the soil erosion fight, from the inputs of fertilizers, natural fertilizers, nitrates, and phosphorus, from the attraction of auxiliary insects. And so, from the capacity that the soil can then have to retain water of rain when it rains, to the capacity to prevent and to create all of these conditions that will allow for the reduction of the need of inputs and to the regeneration of the system in itself. I brought here 4 different types of scenarios with cover crop that kind of cover the entire spectrum of scenarios, from cover crops to, just as it was introduced in the first presentation, cover crops for the specific reasons of soil, for specific reasons of auxiliary insects, for specific reasons of nitrates. And so with regards to that, there's a plethora of examples here. Another example of a very interesting use of ecosystem services is bats. So in this case, what you're looking at here is a bat shelter or bat hotel, as you might want to call it. So with the attraction of this kind of little mammals, we can indeed reduce the use of pesticides, because bats in average eat around 5 times their weight per night, and they have a very voracious appetite. So indeed, what we have been witnessing from the studies that we've been finding is that indeed the bats go in through the night and eat the insects that we want them to eat. In fact, in the Alentejo region, because we have several areas that only not have a vineyard, but they also have olive grove, what we see is that the bats also go into the olive grove and also eat the insects, the plagues that affect the olive groves. So it's an interesting strategy to reduce costs and even to attract some tourists, because people always like to look at the bat shelters and now what's the function of this ecosystem service.
Mm-hmm.
Another interesting ecosystem service is the use of sheep in the vegetative rest of the vineyard. So again, here we prevent the use of herbicides. And so by doing that, we reduce our dependency for fossil fuels, reduce our dependency from our carbon footprint. And obviously, these are not obviously a perfect scheme, because the sheep can also help to compact a little bit the soil. But in fact, the reality is, from the feedback we have from our producers, and we have more and more producers adopting this methodology in wintertime, it's more the benefit than indeed the prejudice of using the sheep.
Okay.
Another example is to use renewable energies in the vineyard for the pumping of the irrigation system. So again, reduction in the use of energy in this case, particularly reduction in the dependency of fossil fuels. And Portugal is after Greece, and Alentejo is after, in Portugal, the region of the country with more hours of sun throughout the year. And so obviously the use of this resource is a no-brainer in terms of potential for use of renewable energies. This is a very interesting example of reuse. In English, this says conservation of natural resources, reused water in use, unsuitable for consumption. So basically, this is a producer that is reusing wastewater treated water from a wastewater treatment plant of a municipality neighboring the vineyard. So this is, ladies and gentlemen, part of the future that the European Commission has been encouraging in the last couple of years. The use indeed of our waters from our sewages, once adequately treated, then used in irrigation in areas where water is shortage, because it doesn't rain all the time as we would wish, like we are witnessing right now in Portugal. Portugal has not rained one drop almost of water, actually didn't drop one drop of water in the whole of January, and the situation does not seem to be very positive for the foreseeable future. And so indeed, these kind of examples with reuse of water is indeed what we need to be obviously more and more potentiated throughout not only the country, but throughout the world, and not only to agriculture, but indeed to landscaping in cities, and why not even for human consumption. Another example, this case of reduce and reuse, we have 2-in-1. This vineyard is in, what's the word? It doesn't use water for irrigation. It's dry farming, and which, let's not forget, was the historically way our vineyards were grown in the past. And so obviously in this case, we have a dry farming vineyard, so obviously no water use, but at the same time, we have a wastewater treatment plant in the base of the image. This water is then used in landscaping, in irrigation landscaping for the areas surrounding the vineyard, the cellar of this producer. Another example of, in this case, reduce, reuse, and regenerate, which is reed water beds wastewater system. So no use of water, no use of electricity, no use of chemicals, no use of energy or money or people for maintenance. And it's a system that clears the water, and then this water is also again reused for irrigation in the field. It doesn't rain in Alentejo, so the more we can capture the rain, the better. So we also obviously also potentiate the creation of ponds be those natural or artificial, and of little lakes that can obviously help to create small water reservoirs that can be of assistance when it doesn't rain. At the same time, obviously, these water reservoirs will be areas where the local fauna can go in terms of stress. You know, there's the biodiversity around these areas. In an area like Alentejo, that it's dry, is of extreme importance for the survival of many migratory species on one hand, and obviously of endemic species on the other hand. On the right side of the picture, you have a hedgerow. Hedgerows are another kind of methodologies that can help to reduce, reuse, and regenerate our system, because we're talking about species that will, on one hand, attract, pretty much like the use of cover crops, they will, on one hand, attract auxiliary insects. They will serve as shelter areas for lots of different macro and microfauna that will assist directly and indirectly in the vineyard. At the same time, that also helps with the structure of the soil. And in some cases, like in this picture, you can see this hedgerow all across the picture. This hedgerow in this particular case had a very interesting purpose, which was to serve as a wind cutter, because when we have our heat waves, the burn gets much more intense if we have wind also. And so indeed, by creating these wind cutters, we reduce the potential for those impacts, and at the same time we create more shelter for more shadow for the vineyard, which is always a very interesting method to assist again in this reduction, reuse, and regenerate strategy.
Joao, if you can conclude.
Almost done.
Yeah, okay.
I'm almost done.
Very good, very good. Okay.
3 more slides.
Okay.
Reuse, regeneration of water lines. The water lines are for the soil, as the veins are for our body. And so by recovering water lines, we are again helping and boosting the system, creating all the conditions for the animals and plants to come back, and at the same time to promote water retention every time that it rains in our vineyards and in our systems. So just to finalize, I would like to leave you with this sentence from Charles Darwin from almost 200 years ago. It's not the strongest of the species that survives. It's not the most intelligent, but the one most responsive to change, which is really what we've been talking about throughout all of this morning. And I'd like to thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for Joao, for your presentation. Very interesting, and with many suggestions of solutions that we can explore. And actually, Darwin said that we called ourselves Homo sapiens. I don't know if we are so sapiens, so wise, but now we have to to face this changing that we made, and to change our action. I don't know if there is one question by Dai Janbu. Drought events are intensity are rather difficult to predict. Have their projection uncertainties been reduced with more reliable predictions now? What would you say about this?
Well, what we say and what we think is what the science is saying, and what we see the science saying is indeed the warning of the frequency of droughts and of heat waves was increasing, and the reality is that's what we're watching, unfortunately. And we see that throughout the spectrum in the whole world, from the fires, as I mentioned, last year in Australia, or in the US, to the fires in the Russian tundra to this year. As we were saying before, it hasn't rained pretty much anything in Portugal. I have to say I'm not familiar or aware how's the situation in the rest of Europe, or at least in the Mediterranean basin area, but probably Spain is in the same situation as we are, and that is very alarming. But at the same time, it catalyzes to do this that we're doing today, and all of these fine examples and inspiring examples of change.
Okay, thank you. And now, actually, the time for this mini symposium is almost over. We have 1 minute left. And I wanted now a general discussion would have been good. We can go on, I think, Pierre-Louis, very few minutes if there are some general questions that we can address and discuss all together with the audience now. What do you say, Pierre-Louis?
It's okay, no trouble. You can continue.
Okay. If there are some more general observations, they are welcome, or some specific questions to the speakers.
Enrico, I would like just to add a little bit to this last question that João answered regarding the question of uncertainties in projections. It's important to understand that the broader the projection you make, the higher the predictability. What I mean is, if you predict the average annual temperature instead of the temperature of a single month, you have a higher predictability. So when you are looking into climate projections into the future, if you are talking climate, you are talking about 30-year averages. Therefore, the uncertainties with these models are much lesser than when you are trying to predict what the weather is going to be in the next 2 weeks. Okay. So, and the past 20-30 years have shown that, because pretty much the projections for climate that we saw in the early 2000s and in the 1990s towards now have actually been less pessimistic than the reality actually is been right now. So in these last 20-30 years, the models have improved, the algorithms have improved as well. And on top of that, the computing capacity has vastly developed. Yeah. And therefore, we have today capacity to make better projections and predictions into the future than we had 30 years ago. But having said this, every prediction has got an uncertainty. And the only transparent and honest way to communicate a prediction is together with its uncertainty in a way that the user can understand what the uncertainty is. And that is a very good rule of thumb to define which predictions should you trust and which predictions you should not trust. If you see a prediction without the uncertainty, my advice is do not trust it.
Yeah, I agree. For sure.
I think it's a good point, Antonio. I mean, we're doing a lot of work here around climate modelling in Australia. We've just released a climate atlas here in Australia, and I'm happy to share that link here with the group, which is quite interesting because, I mean, the accuracy of temperature prediction now is a lot more accurate than rainfall prediction. But we're seeing a real shift. I'm not sure if this is the same in the European context, in a shifting away from a predominance in a lot of areas of winter rainfall to being more actually in the summer and in the harvest, and more heavier rains actually during the harvest time. So there's some real challenges here for us in Australia around the shifting rainfall pattern in what we're seeing. So I'm not sure if there's a similar pattern in Europe.
Yeah, it was quite the same what we are seeing. Lesser rainfall in the moments that we traditionally had, and heavier downpours, actually with very bad impacts in agriculture, because not only they are destructive, but the water that falls usually do not remain in the soil and will just run off.
Actually, water saving has to be implemented more widely than it is now. So I would say, and actually Europe is going into that direction. So the European Green Deal is not under discussion; it's already decided. Farm to fork is already decided. So we have to implement. But that is true also for. Of course, other continents, other areas, we have to go. And I don't know, then to force people to do something is always as a negative effect. But to some extent, we have to achieve this, because it's vital now. So yeah, also the persuasion of operators, of growers, of course, is very, very important, but we need to achieve this. Okay.
Enrico, if I may add, I think the point you just mentioned is a really critical point, and it's a strong responsibility on the scientific community to actually communicate in a way that the people who need the information can understand. I think that is one of the major teachings of the IPCC so far, the IPCC its onset up to now. But also we have good examples, and Mark, as a representative of the Australian Wine Research Institute, can provide us some good insights into that, because the AWRI has been doing a very good job of actually decoding the scientific knowledge into usable, practical information for people in the field. The same has happened in these last years at the University of Bordeaux with the publication by the International Viticulture and Enology Society of NO1, and together with NO1, the technical reviews, which actually decode the scientific papers published in NO1 for a more practically minded audience who really needs that information to improve what they do and to advance. So I think this is a critical point. We are in the age where scientific knowledge is required by the common citizen, and therefore there is a responsibility by all of us who engage in creating that knowledge, in disseminating it in a way that is usable and useful for the people who need it.
Yeah, actually, it's a big task, but we have to do it. We have the responsibility to do that, for sure. Okay. Any other?
If I might add something to that, I think it's obviously very important, everything he said. I think it's also important not to forget that the main consumers are the companies, are the industries, are not the consumers. The consumers are the end result, really. And so obviously the sharing of knowledge that like what Antonio, for example, presented, and what I also, well, actually what a bit everybody presented, the best practices, like Robin did with all of those companies that did all of those good practices. Obviously that information is to be shared cross-sectionally through the industry, and the industry needs to speak to the industry and give, return on investment. How long did it take? How did I do it? What was the effort? Because that's also, extremely important, because that's where the consumption is. As I said, agriculture spends 70% of potable water in the world. And let's not forget that 2% of potable water in the world is the one that's available to us. All the rest is in the North Pole and in the South Pole frozen, and it's now actually being lost due to climate change. And so it's very important that the best practices of industry are passed within the industry to the industry, besides everything else you said, of course.
Can I just touch on the carbon story? I think this is going to become much more important for us all. And Antonio, thank you for your presentation and that video. I think it was really, what you're doing with, in the winery there with lightweight bottle glass and with solar and the things that you're doing there are really critical. So I think for us as a global wine industry, I think it's great to, see what we're doing. We understand what's going on with climate change. I think in Australia, we've been the canary in the coal mine, if I might use that analogy, for the rest of agriculture, and really making sure that we, we help and help the other agricultural sectors adapt. But the pressure is turning on us in a big way here in Australia around really thinking about carbon a lot more thoroughly, about, how we might, really be a lot more efficient in our life cycle, in terms of life cycle analysis of our products and getting them to the consumer. So I think, perhaps for me, there probably needs to be a little bit more discussion around what are the real solutions here for the sector to play its part in reducing the carbon footprint from a global perspective on emissions, and therefore playing its part in addressing the future of climate change, the impact of climate change here as well.
Yes, Okay. Okay, so any other question or observation or opinion?
Can I be, Enrico, can I be a bit disruptive with regards to this
Yeah,
last
sure,
Mark
sure,
comment?
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think I often wonder to the extent in which is carbon offsetting or carbon emissions in the industry really an issue, because if we look at overall carbon emissions in the world, agriculture is responsible for 25% of those. Of those 25%, around half is cattle breeding. So the other half will be all other agriculture. And then within all other agriculture, wine industry represents 3% of carbon emissions in the world. At least some of the studies I've seen, it's what they say. So when we look at, for example, all these strategies of regeneration agriculture and boosting the resilience of the systems, I mean, all of that works as carbon off, and when we're talking about lower tillage of the soil, also reduction of carbon emissions, retaining the carbon in the soil. So all of those are methods and technologies to, in fact, capture carbon and release oxygen. And so I often wonder to the extent, because I see so many, you know, and I applaud and I applaud all the initiatives I see with regards to reducing carbon emissions from electric vehicles to the bottle weighing and so many other stuff that we've been looking at, the carbon dioxide from fermentation and so on and so forth. But if you look at it from such an overall perspective of the 3% that the industry overall in the world is responsible to, I wonder if all of that money shouldn't be being put in putting, you know, buffer zones, regenerative agriculture, and much more into the nature side of the business than really in the side of the business, which is, you know, ultimately for the consumer, seems to me. But as I said, this is disruptive and provocatory. I would like to hear.
Yeah, and I think it's a good discussion, and I think we can have many glasses of wine to really you know, ferment over this and talk a little bit more. But I think from an industry, we've got to play our part. You know, yeah, 3% is still 3%, and I think we've got to, you know, like I said, what's going to happen here is it's going to be the consumer and the retailers and the customers are going to control the social license of how we operate here, and therefore we've got to be seen to be doing the right things from a production perspective and playing our part in addressing the emissions issues that we've got.
Well, João, you opened the Pandora box, and I think that this could be a very good subject for another mini symposium. You know, biodiversity and nature conservancy in viticulture. I just wanted very briefly to point out that I have actually done the math regarding to that, and it's not 3%; it's 0.12% of total. It does not excuse us from doing what we should do in order to decrease as much as we can. But it does come to a moment, and that's where I'm going to stop today. It does come to a moment when the companies are going to have to make a choice and make a decision whether to use the money into mitigation or into actual adaptation. And that's because if you are 0.3% of the total emissions, and you have to spend a lot of money in investing for mitigation, and you are at the same time not using that money for adaptation, is like you are trying to take water out of a sinking boat when a tsunami is coming, you know. So, I mean, this is something that needs to be reflected. I'm pretty sure that today, the vast majority of senior management in companies that are addressing the climate situation in the wine sector, they are very aware of this. And we have been seeing some shifting in some policies and some strategies from corporations around the world towards the balance between mitigation and adaptation. Just a last figure for you. Up to 2019, the European Central Bank had invested about 21 billion euros towards climate. Of those 21 billion euros, 19.8 billion were into mitigation. this gives you an idea of just how unbalanced things were and how much at risk our societies are today, because we all know that RCP 4.5 is pretty much beyond us. So the 1.5 degrees level, unless some unexpected technological breakthrough happens in the next 10 years, and I'm talking about carbon capture and storage. I'm not talking about emission reduction. Unless something comes really that changes the paradigm from where we are now, we are going to live in a world that is going to be 2.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. And that is a world with a lot of nasty things happen to which we must prepare, not just as a sector, but as a society. And I think this would be a very good subject to discuss for another symposium.
Oh yeah, sure. I totally agree. See, and we will keep the suggestion, because the situation needs to be more clarified, and these ideas have to be spread. So we can also help in to some extent this, but this is very crucial. So we have to do something in facing this. Okay, Pierre-Louis, if you want to conclude.
Oh, well, it looks a very nice discussion and a very interesting perspective now. We can see that there is such challenges, so many challenges there. So we are just one part of the humanity, one part of the agriculture area, in fact, but we need to do our best to participate, to be as clean as we can, and to preserve our future for all new generation, of course, and to make possible the wine going from one century to another one. So this is also one of the points here, because the life without wine is like a part of life without some pleasure, especially when we meet, especially we have events, and when we appreciate culinary perspective. So this is also one of the points that we need to not forget. So we need to be more resilient, to give also some perspective to our future. So that's a very important key issue here. So probably thanks to all. Thank you, Enrico. Thank you, Mark. Thank you to Antonio and all the panelists. It was wonderful to hear all of you. I think that we can look for next mini symposium, explore the new topics all together.
Yes.
And so, of course, it was recorded. So I think that it will be possible to look if you want, if you go to the website, on the Innoviti website. And tomorrow there is another meeting that is not a mini symposium, but a sprint meeting that is more devoted to residues and how to use or do valorization of co-products, and also on some effect on compounds coming from grapes, especially on hypertension or diabetes, for example. So thank you very much to all. Thanks to all the attendants also, and we can say bye-bye and see you tomorrow for the ones that will be connected, and the next time for next event.